Olá! Antes de você assistir a entrevista que você está prestes a assistir, eu queria te contar um pouquinho mais sobre quem você vai ouvir. Porque você vai ouvir Jon Kabat-Zinn. Jon Kabat-Zinn é professor de medicina da Universidade de Massachusetts, nos Estados Unidos. Fiquei muito feliz que eu consegui falar Massachusetts. É preciso atenção plena para conseguir falar Massachusetts sem errar. E provavelmente, se você já ouviu falar em atenção plena e se você já ouviu falar em mindfulness, foi por causa de Jon Kabat-Zinn. Lá atrás, na década de 70, ele já era professor de medicina e ele ficava absolutamente inconformado de que os pacientes com dor crônica sofriam demais e que num determinado momento não havia mais nada que a medicina podia fazer por eles. Jon Kabat-Zinn já meditava e sentia, claro, no próprio corpo, na própria mente, os efeitos da meditação. E ele começou a pensar, será que a meditação não pode ajudar os pacientes com dor crônica a sentirem menos dor? Ou a, pelo menos, sofrerem menos com aquela dor que eles sentem? E foi a partir daí que ele desenvolveu o método de redução de estresse baseado na atenção plena ou baseado no mindfulness, como você preferir chamar. Eu tive a honra de conversar com Jon Kabat-Zinn, é uma referência internacional sobre meditação, é, sem dúvida nenhuma, o cara que conseguiu trazer o mindfulness para o Ocidente e fazer com que todos nós já tenhamos escutado essa palavra. Foi uma conversa deliciosa que eu espero que vocês aproveitem muito, tá bom? Depois me conta. It's a great pleasure to talk to you. I was looking forward to talk to you. I'm reading your book, The Focused Catastrophe Living. First of all, I would like you to define mindfulness.
The easiest way to define mindfulness is that it's a different word for awareness. Okay, so it's very simple. But people don't really understand awareness. We don't think about our awareness very often. So we need to, in some sense, find a way or a practice to cultivate our capacity to be aware. It's not that the capacity itself is perfect, but our access to it's not so good. So mindfulness as a form of meditation is basically, my working operational definition is that it's the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So I'll say it again. It's the awareness that arises from paying attention, we all can do that, on purpose, so that means intentionally, in the present moment, which of course is the only moment any of us ever have to live or pay attention or anything else, and then non-judgmentally. And the non-judgmentally part is very challenging.
It's very challenging, right? Because we used to judge things and people all the time, right?
We're doing that. And so it's not that mindfulness means that you shouldn't be judgmental. It means because you're going to be judgmental all the time, but it means that you're aware of the judging and you're in some sense not judging the judging, or you're suspending on purpose. You're suspending your kind of automatic judging faculty. And that gives you a kind of new perspective on life, on yourself, on your body, on the possibility of being more fully present in your life without all of the ideas and opinions that make things much more narrowly defined than they actually are in reality. And then that serves, those kinds of narrow confines kind of make like a prison for us. And there's a quotation from Albert Einstein in Full Catastrophe Living that actually speaks about the mind that doesn't know itself as a kind of prison.
The mind that doesn't know itself. Most of our minds doesn't know themselves.
Well, that's why people are talking about mindfulness so much nowadays, that I think there's so much suffering going on in the world And people are beginning to realize that the solution to that suffering is not going to come from the outside. It's going to come from how we understand our relationship to our own body, to our own thoughts, to our own emotions, to the people we are closest to, the people we work with, the people in our family. And that very often we're filtering all of that through our ideas and opinions and our likes and dislikes and our judgments. And that makes the prison.
A wandering mind is an unhappy mind?
You know, that phrase is the title of a paper. I know you know this. The title of a paper in the scientific journal called Science, which is one of the premier science journals in the world. And it's from a paper, a study by Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert. And the title is A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. And they did what's called an experience sampling iPhone study to just check with thousands of people in any given moment around the 24 hours. Is your mind attentive to what you're supposed to be doing, or is it someplace else? And that's one question. The other question is, how happy are you? And it turns out that about 50% of the time, people are not really paying attention to what they're doing or are supposed to be doing.
It's amazing.
And when they check this on iPhones right through the 24 hours, and then when they're asked, how happy are you? When their mind is wandering, they're much less happy than when their mind is fully present. So I completely agree with a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. But, you know, they didn't invent that. That's only thousands and thousands of years old. It's a kind of axiom of the meditative traditions that the mind that, in some sense, you could say not just wandering, but doesn't know that it's wandering, the mind that doesn't know itself and its own activity is a very unhappy mind, and also tends to suffer an enormous amount because things are never right. If things are good, you know they're not going to last forever, and then you get depressed because it's not going to last. And if things are bad, that same mind tells you it's going to last forever. And so either way, you create this suffering, and it's all in how you see your relationship to experience. So that's something that can change.
That can change, right? Because many
We
can change it, right? Many people think that we can empty our minds, and to meditate we have to just empty our minds. Is that true? Can we empty our minds?
That's a big mistake. It's a big mistake in understanding what meditation really is. People think, well, you sit down and you close your eyes and you make your mind go blank. So that, first of all, that's impossible. You'll just give yourself a big headache. So that's a deep misunderstanding, but a very common misunderstanding of meditation is that you're supposed to feel a certain something. The real beauty behind meditation, and especially mindfulness, is that you don't have to have a special experience. The experience that you're having is already insanely special, but we don't recognize that. We want something else, something that feels like it's missing. I'll be happy if I get this, or I'll be happy if this goes away. Just take some examples, like your eyes work. You wake up in the morning, why aren't we happy that our eyes actually can see, or our ears can actually hear, or that we can actually smell or taste or touch? I mean, these are incredible, or think or feel. So meditation's not about feeling some special experience that you don't usually have. It's recognizing that moment by moment by moment, all of your experiences are, frankly, insanely special while you're still alive. And the challenge is, how are you going to be in wise relationship with it? And when everything is great, it's easy to say, well, I'm happy, everything's going well and everything else. But what if you have pain? What if you have emotional pain or physical pain, or you're dealing with some kind of chronic illness? The idea of meditating is not to make that all go away. It's to put out the welcome mat for your actual experience and then find new and creative ways to learn to live with things as they are. And when you do that, things as they are actually change, because what you're doing is you're changing your relationship to it. And that's actually my working definition of healing, that healing is coming to terms with things as they are. It doesn't mean surrendering to them or, sort of giving up, but it means when you tune in, then you have an opportunity to really grow, learn and grow and heal and transform using the whole apparatus of your body, your mind, your heart, your being. And we say to our medical patients in MBSR who come with every conceivable medical problem in the world, we say to them, look, from our point of view, as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you. And we're going to pour energy in the form of mindfulness, in the form of attention into what's right with you. Let the rest of the hospital and medical center takes care of what's wrong with you, and see what happens. So then what we're talking about is a new kind of medicine. It's a kind of participatory medicine where, rather than an auto mechanics model of medicine where you just drive your body in and they fix things or replace things or treat you, but that you participate in your own movement towards health and well-being. And a human body and a human being and a human brain is like a dynamical system that is capable of healing and capable of self-regulating.
I would like to ask you about breath. As long as you're breathing, there's nothing wrong with you.
No, I didn't say that. As long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you.
Ah, now I understand.
They have problems, or they think there's something wrong with me. Many people think there's something wrong with them, even though there's nothing really wrong with them. So we don't want to take that away from them. Yes, we have problems, lots of problems, stress, pain, illness, but how we are in relationship to it can make all the difference in quality of life, in health, in healing.
Do you think many of us just forget that we have a body?
Yeah, absolutely. That study, the wandering mind, most of the time, if people are not in their bodies, they're up here, from the neck up, thinking. And most of what they're thinking is anxious or depressed,
and
fearful.
Our thoughts can improve our stress, right? And the stress can improve our illness, right?
Yes, absolutely, of course. It's not, but it's important to realize that it's not the stress that is what develops the illness. It's how we are in relationship to the stress. If we succumb to the stress, if we are overwhelmed by the stress, then it can have very deleterious effects on the body and on mental functioning. But if we choose to bring greater mindfulness to the stress, even if the stress is like not something you could make go away. Like let's say you have a sick child. You have a child with a chronic medical problem. And there have been studies of parents with children like this. You can't just say, well, I have too much stress, I'm going to leave my family and go sit on the beach. You're not going to ever abandon your child. So this means a lifetime of stress. But the interesting thing is, if you turn towards the stress and you open to it as opposed to resisting it, then it has very different effects on your body and mind, including studies by a Nobel laureate, Elizabeth Blackburn, that show that people who meditate have longer telomeres, the repeat subunits at the ends of all of our chromosomes, and that over time, the stress, of course, can kill you. But if you are changing your relationship to the stress, then you don't experience that kind of biological pressure that results in premature death even, or premature illness. So the principle is it's not the stress, it's how you choose to be in relationship to it that makes all the difference.
You were talking about self-regulation, that our bodies are capable of self-regulation. How does it work?
The fact of the matter is that all of our biology is based on self-regulation. You know, when we're tired, we sleep. No one knows how we do that. But when we're tired, sooner or later, we go to sleep. And nobody knows how to go to sleep. We just let go and disappear. And then we wake up. So the body is regulating everything. It's regulating blood pressure. It's regulating, blood flow. It's regulating, all of our senses. It's regulating all of the thousands of liver functions that are going on moment by moment by moment.
Lucky of us that we don't have to think about it, right?
That's right. The core of evolution.
Yeah.
I think I say I'm quoting a doctor in Full Catastrophe Living who said, I would rather be at the controls of a 747 trying to land it with no previous experience as a pilot rather than to be at the control of my liver for 30 seconds.
Yes, I read that. Yeah, that's perfect.
Enormously complex. Mm-hmm. But yet, yes, we have this capacity to self-regulate. Now we can cultivate that capacity by doing very simple exercises or practices that, say, modulate our emotional reactivity. So you mentioned breathing. So we're all breathing, and luckily it's taken care of for us. That's another form of self-regulation, because if it were up to us to remember to breathe, of course, we all would have died a long time ago, because a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. We get distracted and we die because we stop breathing. But the body doesn't let us stop breathing. But if you bring your attention to your breathing in your body, it's tremendously calming, it's tremendously centering, and it's also a way of stepping out of the normal flow of time into the present moment, which has a timeless quality to it. So if you take some time every day, as people do when they're practicing mindfulness-based stress reduction, you have to take 45 minutes a day at least to cultivate it through meditation practices, formal meditation practices. One of the major ways that we do that is we befriend the sensations of breathing. When it's not thinking about breathing, but we're beginning to attune to the feeling of the breath moving in and out of the body. So that's very calming, very centering, very relaxing. And then you'll notice that your mind has a life of its own. It gets into the wandering that you started out with. So you're sitting there breathing, and all of a sudden the mind has some thought about the past or the future. And the exercise, the challenge, is to notice what's on your mind at that moment. And then sooner or later, you'll notice that you were distracted and you've forgotten about your breathing. You've forgotten about the feeling of the breath in the body, at the belly, or wherever, at the nostrils. And you come back. And then a few minutes later, or a few seconds later, the mind will go off again. You bring it back again. Mind goes off, bring it back.
No problem with that.
It's no problem unless you want to make it into a problem. Because it's the nature of the mind to wave, to go here, to go there, to get obsessed. But when you are holding it in awareness like this, then it's just like the mind is doing its thing, just the way the Atlantic Ocean is doing its thing. It's waving depending on atmospheric conditions. When it's very turbulent or, stormy, then lots of agitation. Same with the mind. But there are other times when it's calm. And if you go drop 20 or 30 meters below the surface, even in a storm, calm under the ocean. So we have that calmness in us all the time. And if you learn to access it, then you're not so eaten up by the stress in your life.
45 minutes a day. Why
that
much time?
That's if they're taking MBSR.
Mm-hmm. But do you have a study that proves that time you can for example, change your brain with that time of practice?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are studies that show you can change your brain with a lot less than 45 minutes. But we're talking about people who have chronic medical conditions that they've had for like 20, 30, 40 years. So in 8 weeks, in order to really honor the magnitude of their suffering, we ask a lot of them. When you ask a lot of people, you're going to get a lot. If you ask a little of people, the most you're going to get is the little that you ask. So we see people as geniuses, as miraculous beings, as deeply, deeply capable of concentration, of cultivating stillness, mindfulness, and so forth. But it's a learning curve. And so this is a kind of very challenging undertaking. We ask a lot of people, and it's very difficult to cultivate mindfulness. It's not, oh, yeah, I'll just be in the present moment and a little less judgmental. That's not going to happen. In the next moment, your mind will be caught by something or other. So you do need to exercise the muscle. You need to train the muscle. The mind goes off, you notice what's on your mind, you bring it back. The mind goes off, notice what's on your mind, bring it back. 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000,000 times.
Does it happen with you until nowadays? Does it happen? Does it still happen with you, this kind of stuff?
Of course.
Yeah?
Yeah. Except that I've been meditating for more than 50 years, and you do learn something from that, and things change and grow over time. There's a certain kind of way in which one's practice matures, but it's not about shutting off the mind, remember? We said that is like shutting off the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean has been waving for longer than humanity's been on the planet. It's not like, well, finally it should stop waving. It would be much better if it was calm all the time. You can't say that any different about the brain. The brain will think, it will feel, it will plan, it will obsess about the past, but you don't have to get caught in it. And in a sense, it's not you. Your thoughts are not you. Your emotions are not you. You're much more akin to the awareness that knows that you're thinking, that knows that your mind is wandering, that knows that you're agitated or that you're depressed or whatever. And then you can investigate that knowing faculty, which we call mindfulness or awareness, and ask yourself the question, is my awareness of my pain actually suffering? And you may discover that no, it's not. It's a kind of new dimension of your own life. It's been here all along, but when you hold things in that way, then you don't take them so personally, and the suffering reduces enormously or disappears altogether, and you have new ways of navigating through your life, but you haven't done anything weird or magical, or you haven't forced anything. You've just learned how to be who you really are as opposed to who you think you are. And part of this is not getting caught in the stories we tell ourselves about how great we are, how terrible we are, how stressed we are, or how life is over for me. All of these are thoughts. They're not the truth. And the truth is much more akin to this awareness that we're born with. We don't have to get it. We don't have to acquire it. But we never trained in school how to actually inhabit our awareness and then regulate thoughts and emotions and reactivity and body sensations and so forth so that they are completely integrated. Nowadays, in the US and in many other countries, children are learning this at 6 years old or even earlier. They're learning it in kindergarten because then all of the learning that follows goes much better when the kids are really present and they know how to self-regulate.
Perfect. And talking about people who suffer from chronic pain, how can meditation can help them?
Well, the same way. You put the welcome mat out for your pain. Nobody wants to do this, by the way. Everybody wants to get rid of the pain, to have someone give them a pill or cut it out with surgery or whatever, but nobody wants to turn towards the experience of their pain and suffering and investigate it. But meditation, mindfulness, is really a way to investigate and understand your own human experience. And when you do turn towards it and put the welcome mat out for, we could say, the unwanted, the unpleasant, the intensely unwanted experience, it makes a big difference in how much pain you're actually experiencing. And sometimes, and we have to differentiate between pain and suffering. So pain is sensation of one kind or another, or it could be emotional pain, but suffering is how you understand it and hold it. So if you befriend your suffering, the suffering disappears, and it's merely things as they are, and you don't take it personally. This is one of the key things, is not to take personally things that are not personal, even if they're horrible, even if they're bad. Because when you take them personally, it's like putting another nail in your own coffin. You don't need to do that. Things are bad enough. But when you rest in awareness and see that you're much bigger than the stories you're telling yourself, then that's a new degree of freedom to actually transform your life and heal to whatever degree is possible. As I said, you're not going to fix certain situations. We're not talking about fixing everything. If you have a child with a chronic medical condition that's never going to get better, it's not, no magic is going to make that difference. But how you hold it is actually magical, and it could transform everything so that your life is primarily happy rather than primarily miserable. You're happy because you've made peace with things as they are, rather than things as you want them to be. Does that make sense to you?
Of course. It makes me
But it's hard work. It's not, I mean, it's not like someone can just say, oh, okay, I heard this program with Jon Kabat-Zinn. I get it. I'll just do that. I'll just be happy and not take things personally. It's very, very hard for us humans. You have to exercise the muscle. Let me say one more thing, if you don't mind, Mariana, because I want to make sure that people understand that the meditation isn't just formal meditation practice. The real meditation practice is how you live your life from moment to moment, no matter what's happening. When you're taking your children to school, when you're putting them to bed, when you're cooking in the kitchen, when, every aspect of living becomes your meditation practice. Why? How? Because you can cultivate mindfulness of the present moment. If you're running, if you're swimming, if you're anything, it's a possibility for being fully present with open-hearted spaciousness. So that's the real muscle we're exercising.
But I have to say that when you start doing that in your whole life, when you are aware that you're not aware, it's terrible. You suffer more. Like, I should be aware of this.
Wait a minute. Is that true?
No,
what happens? Let's say you're aware that you're not aware. Then what happens in the next moment?
I'm aware.
But how does the suffering get generated?
Oh, yes, but for example, nowadays I'm living like, I have to do that, I have to do that stuff, and now, okay.
Everybody's very busy.
This is very busy, that's very tiring, right? All the time you have to think that you have a lot of things to be done, and then you realize, oh my God, I'm thinking that I should be doing that instead of paying attention in the moment right now.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and then then you come back to the present, right? That's the difference.
Exactly. But you see, whether you make yourself miserable or not because of that is your choice. You don't have to be miserable. It's just the way it is. You can change your life. But what I'm saying is, don't believe your stories about how stressed you are, because that just makes you more stressed. You just get done what you get done, and what you don't get done, you won't get done. And pretty soon you'll be dead, just like all the rest of the people on the planet. So the most important thing is, while you're alive, why not really appreciate that you are alive and there really is more right with you than wrong with you in any given moment? And rather than beat yourself up about how you're not getting it all done, or it's driving you crazy because you got 10 times more things to do in a day. And I know that as well as you. I mean, we all are in that situation. And, if you reach for your phone or something like that, and it's like everybody's like perpetually distracted.
Yes, exactly.
It's a choice. We can actually choose to drop in this moment and be still.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that you can't be running or working or, you're a television host, right? So you could be on camera just as we are now and fully present.
Of course.
Of course, you're thinking about what you're going to say next, what I'm going to say next, how it's going to go. But the same thing, at the same point, it's like, this is not about getting someplace else. Things are flowering or unfolding in this moment, and there's a beauty in that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that's it for this moment. Then there's the next moment. So how could we be in relationship to that one? Is it moment by moment by moment by moment? And some, of course, will get lost. And an hour later or 10 days later, we'll remember, oh, I completely lost my mind. I was insane. That's good information, too. Then you realize it's possible to really lose your mind, go crazy, say things you don't want to say, hurt people you don't want to hurt. But then you realize, was that me or was that just my unconscious reactivity and sort of in some sense my fear that I'm not living the life I want to live? And especially if we can just make peace with it and realize maybe it'll change later, but right now, maybe it's good enough.
Yes, you're right.
That's to ask is, what's good enough? What would be good enough for now?
Yeah.
And part of it is,
that's
if a wandering mind is an unhappy mind,
yes,
then a mind knows that it's wandering, because you can't stop the wandering.
No.
But you can slow it down, but you don't have to try to slow it down. But a wandering mind, if that's an unhappy mind, then what would a happy mind be? A mind that's more stable.
Mm-hmm.
That's something you cultivate moment by moment by moment. We're doing it now. You could say, we are meditating together. You're in Brazil. I'm in California. So it's like thousands of miles, different time zones. I've never met you. You've never met me. But what's really going on here is deep listening. You're listening. I'm listening to you. We're having a kind of conversation that's also a kind of exploration of sorts, a deep exploring of something. So that's moment by moment by moment. We're both fully present. This is a form of meditation. It's called dialogue.
It's
mindful
so good.
conversation.
And it's so good to do that. Yeah.
Good. It does feel good because that's part of our core humanity, is that as human beings, we love it when we connect with each other. There's something very satisfying about it. And when we also connect in a way that doesn't want anything from the other person. It's like when you want something, then that's a kind of form of violence towards the other. But if we're just tuning to each other and respectful in that and deep listening about what needs to emerge in our conversation because you are doing a program on mindfulness and MBSR or whatever it is that you're doing, then that's real work. This is work, but it feels like play, right?
Yes,
it feels like fun.
It's true. No,
that's
true.
Real work.
Yes. What's the importance to consider body and mind with a strong connection to the process of healing?
Well, there's no such thing as the body and the mind. When you say, for instance, my body, who is talking? It's funny. We say, I have a body, but who's that? Is that your mind? Is it the mind that owns the body? So there's a lot about being human that is quite mysterious. We don't really understand consciousness or awareness. Part of the beauty of this work is that there is no body and there is no mind. There's only life expressing itself. And when we have a brain with 86 billion neurons and 86 billion glial cells that are also in there and we don't even know what they are doing, it's the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe, right inside our heads. And then all of that is coming down into the body. So we're not a body and a mind. We're a unified whole that's very hard to put into words. We don't have a language for it because our language always separates you from me, this from that, like, dislike, want, don't want, body, mind. So the key thing is integration. Can we integrate body, mind, heart, feelings, and social connection.
So the key is the integration between body and mind.
Yes.
I would like to ask you, for example, if someone can get sick because of his thoughts, for example.
That's what the major depression is a sickness of thinking. You misapprehending who you are, and you believe your thoughts. And let's say, you have a thought that people don't like me. And then you bring evidence to bear to support that belief. And then that just brings you down more and more and more into a black hole of depression, deep, dark depression. This is a disorder of thinking. And mindfulness-based, there's not just mindfulness-based stress reduction, there's a whole family of different kind of mindfulness-based medical and psychological interventions now. The biggest one after MBSR is MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Mm-hmm. And they say it's possible to work with people who have major depressive disorder and teach them how to not, just what we've been talking about, how to not take their thoughts so personally and believe them. And when you do that, they've shown remarkable results in scientific studies where you can, if you've had 3 or more episodes of major depressive disorder in your life, and that could mean being hospitalized for 6 months or something, really, really caught in a black hole. Mm-hmm. And you've had 3 or more of those episodes in your life, the likelihood that you'll have another one is over 90%. And they've shown that if you take people and train them in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is a lot like mindfulness-based stress reduction, they can have the relapse rate in people like that, which is really remarkable. So there are all sorts of ways in which disordered thinking, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorder, all these kinds of things can be healed, because you were asking about healing, through these kinds of practices. When you bring them into your life as a full spectrum, it's not just formal meditation, but it's, as I said, how you relate to your life moment by moment and your circumstances. And part of it involves awareness of thinking and realizing that most of your thoughts are really not true. They're very, toxic. And when you believe them, then they really imprison you. This makes...
Of course it does.
And at the beginning, it was a small, it was one hospital that it was in, one major medical center. Mm-hmm. Now it's all around the world. There are over 700 programs, hospitals and medical centers around the world. And that's not MBCT and all sorts of other mindfulness-based programs as well.
Why do you decide to work with that? To create
Me, myself, personally? I wrote a paper about that, which I can send you. It's quite long, and it's quite personal, but I felt it was important for it to be personal. So the short answer to that is out of love. I was trained as a scientist at MIT with a Nobel laureate in a laboratory of a Nobel laureate. My father was a top-notch scientist at Columbia University Medical Center. So I grew up in a family that valued science and that also valued the arts because my mother was a painter. And so from the time I was very young, I was looking for something that could, in some sense, hold different ways of knowing, like science and art and poetry and music and so forth, as a kind of like, what is the deep underlying meaning of all this creativity and beauty? So after I got my doctorate at MIT, I kept asking myself, because I'd already been exposed to Buddhist meditation practice for many years. Mm-hmm. And I kept asking myself, what is my job on the planet? With a capital J. In other words, what would be a work that I would love so much I'd pay to do it rather than paid to do it? And I know that sounds a little crazy and also a little privileged, but in those days, in the in the early 70s, somehow that was okay. And so I spent 10 years meditating on that. And then finally, I had a vision of what I wanted to do, and it was MBSR. I was already working in a laboratory at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, and I started talking to doctors about things like, what percentage of your patients do you think you help? And they would say things like, well, maybe 10%, maybe 20%. I said, well, my God, what happens to all the rest of them? And they say, well, they either get better on their own or they never get better.
Wow.
And I said, well, do you think that it would be valuable to create a clinic where you could send all the people who are not getting better, that you don't know what to do with, and we could see if we could use these intensive Buddhist meditation practices without the Buddhism, and also Hatha yoga practices, and just challenge them to do something for themselves as a complement to whatever you're doing for them, and see what happens, and research it. And they said, yeah, I can think of 100 people I could send you tomorrow. And that's how it got started.
Wow. Do you ever imagine a moment like now we are living, that science and tradition can talk and sit together and can...
That's happening. And it's never happened before.
Never happened before, right?
In history. Never. And, the Dalai Lama has played a big role in that. And the Mind and Life Institute that I've been a part of for a very long time, since the 1990, the Dalai Lama is really into science. Mm-hmm. And of course, Tibetan meditation practices are, very, very interesting and powerful. And they're part of this much larger Buddhist tradition. So, but the interesting thing is that the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. So he was a human being just trying to understand suffering and the possibility for liberation from suffering, and also to understand the nature of mind and how mind can actually compound suffering or liberate from suffering. So that's got nothing to do with Buddhism. It's just about being human. And so it was perfectly natural to be able to take these meditative practices coming out of the Theravadan tradition, the Zen traditions, and the Vajrayana traditions, and in some sense try to offer them in a way that didn't dumb them down, and that was ethical, because being in a medical center, the ethical foundation is always the Hippocratic Oath, which is to first do no harm, and just do it as an experiment and see what would happen. And what would happen is people who had chronic problems for many, many years wound up saying, wow, I got been really helpful in reclaiming my life, getting healthier, being able to live with disabilities, live with the problems that I have, but in a way that amplifies well-being, that amplifies health, that amplifies happiness. So this confluence of the meditative, contemplative traditions coming together with science and medicine is really remarkable. And part of it is actually telling us more about the brain and about healing, because if you want to really understand what the brain is capable of, you put monastics, monks who've been practicing for like 50, 60 years, put them in fMRI scanners and see what their brains are like. Very different from an ordinary person.
Yes, right. Our well-being depends on what?
Well, the deepest well-being is independent of outside causes and conditions and inside causes and conditions. That's what wisdom really is a well-being, or in Greek it would be called eudaimonia, that is independent of, like, if I win the lottery, I'll be happy. Or if I buy a new home, I'll be happy. Or if my business doesn't go down, if my business doesn't fail, then I'll be happy. If my business fails, then I'll be miserable. These are what are called the causes and conditions of relative happiness. But true happiness is being able to come to terms, as I said, with things as they are, and be equanimous, be balanced, be wise, be loving in the face of difficulty, the difficult. That's real wisdom. And you know what? We see this happen with people. I mean, it's not just for the outlier, one or two people, but people's lives transform and they just get bigger, or they don't get bigger. They realize how big a human being really is, much, much bigger than the confining stories we so often tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes, of course it does. Do you believe in any meditation or only mindfulness?
Well, I don't know exactly what you mean by believe in. There are many different forms of meditation. And, meditation is a way of really focusing the mind and investigating the nature of mind. There are many, many different forms of meditation, and not just in Buddhist traditions, but in, many world traditions. Understood correctly, you could say that they're all different doors into the same room. Mm-hmm. They're all different doors into being more compassionate, being more human, being more realized, being more awake, being kinder. The Dalai Lama is famous for saying, "My religion is kindness."
That's good religion, right?
It's pretty inclusive.
Pretty inclusive, yes. Do you think we can abandon traditional medicine with mindfulness, or we should put the two things together?
This was never about abandoning traditional medicine. If you listen to the words medicine and meditation, they sound a lot alike. Medicine, meditation, they come from the same root meaning. And the deep Indo-European root is to measure, in the Platonic sense of everything has its own right inward measure. So medicine is the restoring of right inward measure when it's disrupted, and by using drugs and surgery and whatever medicine has it available to it, or psychotherapy for that matter. Mm-hmm. And meditation is the direct perceiving of right inward measure. In other words, recognizing your own wholeness, even in the face of stress, pain, and illness. Medicine and mindfulness are, in some sense, when they're both good medicine and good mindfulness, they're the same thing. You're not going to create limits, and only look at it this way. You'll look at it in many different ways and find the right path for dealing with things. I mean, right now I have a bad cough that, and a lot of people have this cough, and it's like maddening. It doesn't mean that I'm not healthy. I'm tremendously healthy, and I have this crazy thing that's driving me crazy. But, I just have to live with it, and it will sooner or later resolve. And I do have doctors that are trying to help me with it. But, the doctors get sick with the same thing, too. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's not like just because there's medicine that there's no more illness. Do you know what I'm saying? Medicine doesn't completely eradicate illness.
Of course.
So, and there are very few cures in medicine. So this is why healing and the kind of how you hold your own life experience makes such an enormous difference in well-being.
Normally you talk about the concept of non-doing.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, for us here in São Paulo is
By the way, I just have to say, your English is fabulous. I could not do this in Portuguese.
No, so my English is not fabulous. I'm working on it, but that's okay. I'm glad that I can communicate.
It's fabulous.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. But I would say that for us here in São Paulo, it's very hard to understand and to accept that concept of non-doing. Can you explain to us how to do that?
Well, how to do non-doing. Non-doing really means this. Okay, so if Sao Paulo is like every place else, it's like New York City or San Francisco or whatever. Everybody's like driving through their moments to get to better moments, or falling into bed at the end of the day completely exhausted, jumping up the next day and back into the world of doing. And there's nothing wrong with that. We are But we don't call ourselves in English human doings. We call ourselves human beings. But we forget about the being. And one of our great philosophers and writers, Henry David Thoreau, wrote a lot about this in the 1800s and talked about how people, this is long before the internet or even railroads, modern civilization, talked about the farmers in Concord, Massachusetts, living lives of quiet desperation. If we ask about all this doing, you could ask, who's doing this doing and why? Do you want to do, and then just die and that'll be it? And Thoreau wrote about this and said he went to the woods for 2 years and just did nothing. And he wrote, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front, that means to confront or to face, only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what they had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Okay, so if you are doing through your whole life, you may miss the beauty of your life. Do you have children?
Yes, two.
I don't. Okay, so you know how easy it is to not actually see your children. You're seeing more your concept of your children than your real children. It's hard to, sometimes connect with them. It's so important to do that because they're our children, for God's sakes. But if we don't cultivate this non-doing, then we won't even have time to see them.
Yes.
We'll be seeing the concept of them, or our likes and dislikes about them, or our worries and concerns about them. So this is the answer to your question. Non-doing really means being, okay? The domain of being, where we just drop into that timeless present moment that we talked about, and we just rest here in awareness, in wakefulness, in knowing, and also in not knowing. So it's not just a thinking kind of knowing, it's a very expansive, multisensorial knowing. And that's kind of like the sort of ground state of our humanity. And that's why we're called human beings, because we can actually, and in the old days, if you were a hunter in the forest, you might sit for a whole day waiting for an animal to appear in the rainforest or something like that. And the trees would talk to you, and the animals would talk to you, and the world was full, but it wasn't doing anything. It was just being in the timeless present of the jungle or the Amazon. So, but then if we cultivate that with meditation practice, say for 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes or 30 minutes, you don't even have to get out of bed. You can just practice mindfulness in bed in the morning before you jump out of bed and start doing. So it's like tuning your instrument before you start to play it. And then you can keep tuning it all day long. But then when you cultivate the capacity to inhabit the domain of being, then all you're doing will be different, because the doing will be coming out of being. It'll be a very different doing.
Very different doing.
And I can tell you, I mean, I'm going to go to a basketball game. The Golden State Warriors, which are the best basketball team in the National Basketball Association, they practice mindfulness. Their coach, Steve Kerr, trained in mindfulness when he was on Michael Jordan's team at the Chicago Bulls. They all trained in mindfulness. They're all very competitive, and they're into doing. They're into getting that ball into the hoop, okay? But they practice being, and not just me, but all 5 of us on the basketball court, and the other team as well, so that they can actually do the doing in a way that is very effective. And I can tell you, they're very, very effective. But mindfulness is a major part of their approaching the game. And many world-class athletes do the same thing, because they understand that the non-doing, when you have the non-doing, it transforms the doing.
Of course.
And so, and sometimes in basketball, they'll say, you have to let the game come to you. Don't force anything. The forcing would be the kind of doing. But the letting it come to you is a kind of magical non-doing but everything happens. So this notion of non-doing and being is very, very powerful, and it's also very, very ancient. And it's at the heart of the martial arts, and it's at the heart of, a lot of Chinese wisdom.
I would like to ask, because I know that a lot of studies and research are now coming up about mindfulness and meditation, and it's happening right now, and in the last 10 years, it happened more and more, and I believe it will happen more and more from now on.
The curve of papers is going exponential.
What's the one that it's the most important, or the most that you have read and I'm surprised with that?
Well, it's almost hard for me to answer that question because there's so much stuff going on, and so much of it is really, really good. One of the surprising things that some people are doing is they're taking people into the lab and they're training them to be mindful for maybe 20 minutes. And they do that just 20 minutes or one whole day. They do a whole day of mindfulness. And these are people, let's take that example. This is the work of a fellow named Fidel Zaidan at Wake Forest University. Mm-hmm. And he took people who were homeless, and that's a lot of stress, trained them in mindfulness for one whole day, and then showed that their brains were different and their immune systems were different. So that's quite remarkable, because it doesn't get much more stressful than being homeless.
But does it last? Like, they are less?
Well, I don't know yet. The science, let me just say, the science is in its infancy. There's more and more of it happening, but it's still, we need 30 or 40 more years of practice it's a very good question. Does it last? Mm-hmm. And we don't know that. I would guess that if they keep practicing, it lasts. Mm-hmm. If you don't practice, it doesn't last. Another kind of series of papers that are very, very important is that, and we didn't know this, that when I started the clinic almost 40 years ago, we didn't have the technology to look at the brain, the way we do now.
Yeah.
So take people going through MBSR, for instance. The structure of their brain changes in 8 weeks. Not just the activity of the brain. That's easy to imagine. The activity of the brain would change. But there are regions of the brain that have to do with learning and memory that actually grow thicker, where you get greater what's called gray matter density. And this is work out of Harvard and the Mass General Hospital from Sarah Lazar and her colleague Britta Herzl, that you get major regions that have to do with learning and memory, perspective taking, emotion regulation, attention regulation, and they're changing like the real estate of the brain in 8 weeks. That's unbelievable. That's a demonstration of neuroplasticity, it's called, that the brain is an organ of experience, and if you train it in particular ways, you can drive the actual structure of the brain to reflect what you're training it to do. So if you're training it to be more and more and more depressed, the brain can actually atrophy in certain ways. And if you're training it to be more and more in a domain of eudaimonia, or well-being, it's a healthier brain. And then it looks more like the brains of those monks and nuns who've been meditating for 30 or 40 years. We're talking about 8 weeks.
We can do that in our lives. We don't have to go to Tibet.
No, you don't have to go to Tibet and sit in a cave and, worry about the food. No, anybody can do that. That's the beauty of this. And then it's a lifetime's work. So it's not like in 8 weeks you're finished. 8 weeks is it's like Cape Canaveral. It's a launching platform. So in 8 weeks, you are launched into the rest of your life being devoted in some sense to being more fully embodied, more fully with things as they are, in the face of the full catastrophe, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because it will all happen. It's part of the human condition, but how you are in relationship to it makes a huge difference. And the scientific evidence from the studies you're asking me about, that they are saying that even small doses of mindfulness, like even 8 weeks in MBSR or less, can actually transform people who are under enormous amounts of stress or experiencing enormous amounts of pain or chronic illnesses that are just not going to go away or get better, but don't necessarily have to erode the quality of your life.
Yes. We interview a lot of people here that now are mindfulness instructors.
So it's happening in Brazil, is it not? I have not been to Brazil yet, but I keep getting the kind of sense that mindfulness is blossoming in Brazil. Is that true?
Yes, it is. And how do you feel about that?
I can't tell you how I feel about that. I love it because this is something that, I started a very long time ago in the basement of a hospital, and it's spread around the world, and it's a force for good. The most important thing is that the people who are doing this work really meditate themselves and practice in a very deep and authentic way, because otherwise it's just coming out of thinking, and that's got nothing to do with mindfulness. So there's a certain danger in mindfulness becoming so popular nowadays, and it's like everybody is trying to find a way to make money doing mindfulness or to, sell products, mindfulness this, mindfulness that. That's not what this is about at all. This is about transforming our understanding of what it means to be human. And it's hard work, as I was saying. It's deep stuff. And the more the people who are researching it or doing clinical work with it or teaching it in schools or whatever, the more they're grounded in their own practice and the more they train with, authentic teachers, the better the world is going to be in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And the world really needs this kind of healing on a global scale. So I love that you're into that. And of course, you have one of the lungs of planet Earth. I mean, the rainforest, the Brazilian Amazon, is one of the lungs, they say, of the Earth, and the other one being over there in the Congo. And so the level of awareness and wakefulness and clarity that's being brought to all the environmental and ecological issues, to say nothing of all the, social problems that your country is facing, the same with so many other countries facing, and the sort of the Olympics and the whole example of the Olympics coming, and they're supposed to do so much good for so many people, and then they can't even use the facilities which are already disintegrating after the Olympics is over. We need to wake up on a political level, and I'm not getting into Brazilian politics. I can't even understand American politics. But, I would say, globally speaking, there are all sorts of forces that are really based on fear going on in the world. And mindfulness can play a very, very big role in some sense, restoring wisdom to the political enterprise, the economic enterprise, so that we can all experience well-being. Because if you take any country and you have people who are really not getting the most out of being a citizen of that country, then that's a toxicity, that's a kind of disease. And if it goes on for too long, the country's not going to be healthy. It's like having the lungs and the liver and the heart all go to war with each other. But wait a minute, it's one organism. So if we don't start to, as I say, come to our senses as a species, we have the capacity to sort of be what I call the autoimmune disease of the planet Earth, that we are the disease itself. We're the vector of the disease, and we're also the first victim.
Yes.
So we need to take care of things on a global level. That's why I asked you if you had children, that taking care of the next generation and educating them in ways that really are grounded in mindfulness and heartfulness and compassion and kindness and wisdom is going to be absolutely essential for us to, deal with all of the kinds of social and economic problems and the global political problems that are facing us nowadays. I love that.
Yes, no doubt. And is it true that you're coming to Brazil to launch the full catastrophe living here?
I don't know. I haven't been invited. I don't know when it's going to be published, but I would very much like to come to Brazil. I've never been there. I remember when my father went there in 1954. My father and mother went, and they loved it.
Oh.
That was 1954. So when the time is right, yes, I would definitely come to Brazil. If it's possible. I must say, just talking with you, I mean, it's been such a pleasant interview. I mean, really pleasant.
Thank you very much. For me too.
Really well prepared for it. I mean, you're asking great questions, and you obviously, care about it, and that's very important to me. I mean, because then whatever program you craft out of this, it will touch a lot of viewers because they'll recognize your love, and that will, in some sense, trigger that kind of appreciation inside themselves.
I hope so. Thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and all the best to you and your team.